Day 158. Major Stillman had been watching Carl Fairley for the past few weeks. He knew that he regularly arrived in his office by 6 a.m. each morning. He walked along the train platform at 4, determined to get in and out before Carl showed up. He looked around before entering the building, which was adjacent to the trading post. Once inside, he walked down the short, narrow corridor and stopped in front of the second door on the left. Again, he looked around to make sure nobody saw him. He pulled the knife out of its sheath on his belt and flipped the blade open. He slowly and carefully worked it between the door jamb and the door, making sure not to mar the wood. He worked the knife down until it hit the top of the spring-loaded bolt that extended from the locked doorknob into the plate covering the cutout in the jamb. He worked it back and forth until he got behind the bolt and leveraged it out of the jamb cutout. He looked around one last time before swinging the door open and entering Carl's office. He closed the still locked door behind him. He sat at Carl's desk and reached down to open his desk drawer. It too was locked. He removed a small leather tool fold from his pocket and took out a steel pick the size of a bobby pin. He worked it gently around in the door lock for a few short seconds until the lock clicked open. Inside the drawer, he rummaged through several files until he found the report on the murders that took place at the train the other day. Major Stillman had conducted the official investigation, but he knew Carl was also conducting his own investigation. He read Carl's report as well as the several interviews he had conducted. He combed meticulously through the entire file until he was satisfied that Carl did not suspect him of any involvement in the incident. He sat back and smiled softly. "Maybe I overestimated you, Mr. Carl Fairley." He was pleased with himself. He put everything back as he found it and slipped quietly out of the office. When Carl arrived at 6, he went to unlock the office door. He looked up into the top right corner of the door frame. The small piece of Scotch tape he placed over the seam between the door and the frame each night upon leaving had been unstuck from the frame, attached now only to the door. Carl looked around but saw no one. He now knew that somebody had been in his office. He rattled the handle. Still locked. He drew his .45 from his belt and entered cautiously. It only took him seconds to know that whoever was in the office was no longer there. Jimmy Abbott was just waking up. He spent the night sleeping in an alley, propped up against the wall behind the diner. He looked into his small day pack and saw that he had just one sandwich and bottle of water left. He was supposed to get picked up in town yesterday evening by Tyler Hobbs or one of his men. Jimmy had been on duty in town all day, keeping track of the soldiers and law enforcement's movements. Now he was actually the last member of the Sons of Liberty to still enjoy his freedom. He was concerned. The group's protocol dictated that if the scheduled pickup didn't happen for whatever reason, the member in town was not to attempt to go to the farm under any circumstances. He was to stay in place and wait for a member of the group to find him. He should have had enough food and water for at least another day, but he was not disciplined and went through most of what he had in his pack. Why not, he thought. After all, that was just a silly precaution. They had never missed a pickup before. Still, he wasn't very concerned. They just fell asleep last night, or they were just messing with him. He was certain that they would be there shortly to retrieve him. He walked over to the camp where the railroad workers lived. He milled around outside the mess tent and seized his opportunity to insert himself into the line for the coffee urns. Major Stillman called a meeting with Lieutenant Saunders and several other key members of his staff On the agenda, he announced, was the recent attacks on the trading post a little more than a week ago, and on the train the other day. Both attacks had resulted in the deaths of several soldiers under his command. He informed his staff that he would be implementing measures to beef up security and bring more troops into town. I think in light of what's happened, we need to double the size of our forces here. Lieutenant Saunders spoke up. I'm not sure that's the best strategy, Major. Do we really want to escalate the situation here? We are supposed to be here to assist the locals in the rebuild of their government. I suggest that we recommend that they increase the local constables' manpower and help equip them to deal with the security issues here. I disagree, Lieutenant. But Major Stillman, with all due respect, Lieutenant Saunders interrupted. Lieutenant, my report is written, and I'm sending it up the chain immediately, the Major responded. Yes, sir, retorted Lieutenant Saunders. Carl Fairley stepped into the small room adjacent to his office and shut the door. He removed a picture of him with his unit in Afghanistan from the wall to reveal a small safe. He opened the safe and took out his handheld ham radio. Before the EMP attack, he kept 2 such radios in a file cabinet in his office on his homestead. The file cabinet was modified to be a Faraday cage. The radios were in a static bag that was placed in a metal strongbox that he sealed with metallic tape he used to wrap heating ducts. The strongbox was then placed in a metal toolbox, which was also sealed with the same tape. The toolbox and other items he wished to protect from EMP were then placed in the tall filing cabinet, and the drawers sealed in the same metallic tape as well. The large base ham radio that he used regularly was on his bench in his shop and was damaged beyond repair during the EMP attack. His wife Abigail had the other handheld with her at all times now. After the military came to the area to help with the civic recovery, they had installed repeaters on a tower outside their base camp. They were either protected from the EMP previously or somehow repaired afterward. Carl was not going to inquire which because he wanted to keep the fact that he possessed and used his ham radio from the government. He dialed in a frequency and keyed the mic and said, Echo 59, Echo 59, do you copy? After a short interval, the response came, Echo 59, copy. Carl responded, request transfer to Foxtrot 7. The reply came back right away, Foxtrot 7, roger. On the opposite end of the transmission, the man Carl was communicating with pulled a spreadsheet out from under the blotter on his desk. He ran his finger down the left column until he reached the line designated by the letter F, or Foxtrot. He then moved his finger to the right until he came to the 7th column. In that square was a frequency marked on the spreadsheet. He turned the dial on his ham radio to match the frequency. Echo 12, copy, he called out. Carl responded, Echo 12, copy. Both men had a calendar that had indicators written on each daily square. When they last talked, Carl asked for a check-in again on Sunday at 9 a.m. The man on the other end agreed. When they looked up Sunday on their calendars, the note read D +1 and H -2. That meant that the agreed upon check-in was +1 day and -2 hours. So both men knew that Carl was actually requesting a check-in on Monday at 7 a.m. They used this code to prevent anyone who might be listening to know when the next check-in would actually take place. Even if someone was somehow able to break the frequency code, they would go to the next check-in on Sunday at 9 and find nobody there. Every day of the month on the calendar had a different adjustment of variable written on it. The combination of both these security code measures made it almost impossible for someone to track their communications. Echo 12, can I get a sit rep? The man asked Carl. Be advised, security breach, location 2, was Carl's response. Location 2 was code for Carl's office. Location 1 was his home. Location 3 was the military command offices, etc., etc. Recommendations or requests? The man asked Carl. None at this time, came the response. Okay, Echo 12, be advised. Increasing daily checks at location 1 times 2. Roger, answered Carl. Location 1, which was Carl's house, was now going to receive 2 daily checks instead of 1. Abigail, Carl's wife, did not know how, when, or why the checks were done, but she knew they were being done, and she knew her role in them. Every day, when Carl left in the morning, he put the living room shade halfway up. It always remained halfway up until he returned home, at which time he put it all the way down. If Abigail ever had an emergency, or if Carl ever failed to return home without prior notice, she was immediately to put the shade in the full up position. She never saw or heard anyone, but Carl assured her that it was being checked daily by person or persons unknown. On a street in a commercial area in a northern Virginia suburb of Washington, D.C., there was an old turn-of-the-century brick 3-story building. The building housed several businesses, most of which closed after the EMP attack. Behind the door in the alley that read Tommy's Bike Shop was a short corridor that had several doors leading off of it. At the end of the corridor was a door that led down to a dark, dingy basement. At the far end of the basement was a steel trap door in the floor covered by a piece of plywood that was attached to it. Upon quick look, it appeared as if the plywood just lay haphazardly on the floor. Outside in the alley were 4 transient men in dirty, ragged clothing. There were 2 at each end of the alley, and they would move around periodically, seemingly at random. Never did they stray out of sight of the bike shop door. Under their ripped and tattered dirty coats, they were equipped with the latest, most high-tech military-grade communications and surveillance gear that money could buy. Each man was also armed with an automatic .45 caliber handgun and several hundred rounds of ammo. Underneath the plywood-covered trapdoor in the basement was a set of wooden stairs that led down to a modern, clean 3-room facility some 30 feet underground. There was a room with 3 cots and a full bathroom, as well as a larger room filled with radio gear. Seated at one of the radios was a man in his early 40s. He was dressed neatly but inconspicuously in khaki trousers and a black hooded sweatshirt. He was talking on the radio in front of him to Carl Fairley, some 300 plus miles away. He hand-printed something on a plain letter-sized paper and handed it to his subordinate and said, "Flush this up the toilet right away." "Yes, sir," came the response, and the man turned and left the room, climbing the stairs to the basement above. In Carl's office, he made arrangements to check in again on Thursday at noon, which really didn't mean Thursday at noon. He signed off and put the radio back in his safe and closed the door, placed the picture back on the wall to conceal the safe, and slid a paper clip behind the picture, lodging it between the picture and the wall. If Carl came in and found the clip on the floor, this would alert him that someone had moved the picture. When he came in today, the paperclip was still behind the picture where he placed it last time he used the radio. At noon, back at the Hobbs homestead, Buddy Tanner was watching Samantha and one other woman prepare a pot of rice and black beans for the group. He had ordered Tyler's people, including the children, into the front room adjacent to the kitchen. He had all the windows nailed shut and a guard posted on the porch outside. They had plenty of food, water, and firewood, and Buddy was confident they could stay there for as long as they needed to get a lead on Roger's whereabouts. Back at the church, Roger was working hard. Greg had started to trust him and was giving him more responsibility with security functions. Roger proved competent and reliable. Always, though, in the back of his mind was Buddy Tanner and the men he was sure were out there somewhere looking for him. Roger had told Greg the complete truth about his involvement with the MC. He let Greg know that he was absolutely sure someone from the MC would be coming to look for him. Greg directed Roger to stay close to the church and to avoid going into town for any reason. He also brought the issue up at the last group meeting. He just told everyone that there were security issues surrounding Roger and asked that nobody mention to any outsider that he was now with the group. Whenever anyone came out to the church, Roger would blend into the background so as not to draw any attention to the fact that he was there. His only real exposure was on Sunday mornings at church service. He sat in the choir loft and stayed out of sight as much as possible. But as Greg pointed out, the people who came varied greatly, and we never knew who would walk through those doors. Greg told Roger, "You are part of the family now, and we will have your back no matter what." In Roger's mind, he knew that the MC would only be interested in him, that if they did ever show up, all he would have to do is surrender to them and go with them without resistance. This was against his nature and instinct, but he would do it to ensure the safety of the others in the group. He shared this with Greg and made Greg promise that he and the other members of the security team would not interfere when and if the time came. "It has to be this way, for everyone's sake," Roger demanded. "If we can't agree on that, I'll pack my ruck and leave right now. I cannot let anything happen to anyone here because of me," he insisted. "I know these men. I know what they're capable of. They will not hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way," he warned Greg. When evening came and the sun started to fall over the horizon, Jimmy Abbott was still alone in town. Now he was starting to get a little more concerned. It looked as if he would be spending another night in town. As he pondered the possibilities of what this all meant, he grimaced. At the church, supper was over, and people were going inside for the evening. Greg and Roger sat in the pavilion in front of the fire talking. Carl Fairley drove his horse up a dirt road toward his homestead at a leisurely pace. He kept going over multiple scenarios in his head. Who would want to break into his office, and why? What were they looking for, and did they in fact find it there? He kept coming back to Major Stillman. Was it just because he didn't trust him already? He briefly considered Lieutenant Saunders, but quickly dismissed him. He was definitely a company man all the way, but there was something about him, something honest and genuine. No, he decided the lieutenant was exactly who he appeared to be. Every train of thought brought him back to Major Stillman. Still, he had to be sure. He needed evidence. It was almost completely dark now. There was very little moonlight. Carl was still about 5 miles from home. When he turned the corner and started toward the hill ahead, 2 riders approached from the tree line on the left. It was Zeb and Zach, Carl's 2 oldest sons. "Hey, Pa," said Zach. "Mama told us to come down and ride in with you." "I welcome the company," replied Carl. He looked over at Zeb. Zeb reported, "It's been quiet. Nothing out of place." Carl nodded, and the 3 of them headed for home. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. God bless you.